Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
A lot of people have covered various ways to play Half-Life by means of the console ports, released or unreleased, and even the remake with Black Mesa. In this video, however, I'll show you various ways you can experience the first Half-Life game on the PC. Something that will make this video more brief than the Doom or Quake videos is one important thing. Valve never open sourced Gold Source. While the SDK was released to assist with developers interested in making mods, Gold Source still has its limitations that can only be raised if Valve wants them to be raised. Which, judging by their current interest in looking forward with technology and also focusing on hardware, that seems unlikely for now. Surprises could happen in the future, but don't get your hopes up. So that means our options are a bit limited, primarily to official ones. Keep that word in mind, primarily. Well, I'm going to start with the way most people will first experience Half-Life nowadays, the Steam release. Now, I could cover the retail CD release, or the WAN version as people like to call it due to its multiplayer being based upon the now shut down World Opponent network from Half-Life's original publisher Sierra. Sadly, I don't have my CD on me to try and install it. I misplaced it, darn. However, there's a video that covers the differences between the WAN and Steam versions if you want to investigate them. Check the description for that. The Steam release of Half-Life is fine. They've updated it a few times to account for certain issues they've had before with its OpenGL renderer along with some other things, though some issues still do remain. A lot of these can be circumvented with some option adjusting and console commands. For instance, when you start the game, you'll be greeted with both HD models and texture filtering turned on by default. The first one you can deactivate with a setting in the options menu, which is right here, and the latter you can turn off using a console command, which I'll show here. Now I know some people prefer to play with one or both of these on. Personally, I find texture filtering to be kinda ugly in old games like these, unless you're playing on a low resolution with a CRT monitor or something like that. And the HD models aren't to my liking either way, though I think that's even more subjective than the filtering opinion. Either way though, something you probably don't want to play with on single player is the lag compensation. Yes, this is turned on by default and has some subtle impacts on the single player experience. While it might be useful in net play, it gives you a few issues with some of the visuals and other things in single player. Use this console command here, and you should be set. There's still some issues that can't be accounted for in there entirely. If you're one of those types with a monitor like me that has a higher refresh rate, you'll probably be disappointed that you can't run Half-Life in frame rates over 100. Now there are console commands to fix this sorta, but remember that Gold Source is based off the Quake engine. That means physics are tied to the frame rate. This can cause some interesting shenanigans if you try to play at higher frame rates. I'd recommend sticking with 100 at best. If you want to add some enhancements to the Steam release, then you could potentially consider using MetaHook. The only problem with MetaHook is that it adds additional DLLs to the Half-Life folder, and that's a no-no for VAC, and there's a chance that you could get banned if you try to use it in VAC servers. If you're not sure, you can always use the insecure parameter for single player. However, this only applies to the base Half-Life installation folder. Mods with independent installation folders such as Sven Co-op, Half-Life Restored, and Half-Life MMod, and probably some others, can circumvent this. Even then, Sven Co-op doesn't have VAC servers, and Half-Life Restored comes with MetaHook installed by default for use of its audio and rendering abilities. You can easily borrow the DLLs and folders and executable for these to put in the MMod folder, which is what I did for my own playthrough of that mod. When I do use MetaHook, I use it primarily for the MetaAudio plugin. It has a more convincing way of portraying HRTF and surround sound than the current audio system of the Steam version. I believe the Steam version sadly lost the potential of its EAX effect somewhere down the road of its patch history. Unfortunate, but I guess they had to cut some things in order to get it working on modern operating systems. Still quite sad either way. Now there's another official way to play Half-Life, and if you thought some aspects of the Steam version were kinda sad, well, this whole version is sad. The entire thing. Yup, it's Half-Life Source. It wasn't a particularly notable port at launch, but they did add some new things to it. These include improved AI, ragdoll physics, improved physics in general, and giving that Source feeling to a Gold Source game. If that makes any sense at all. The issue is that they didn't do much else with this version. It's like a hastily done source port. I know, located brutally. But sadly, this port has genuinely aged like milk due to neglect. Ever since Valve introduced its Steam Pipe update system to source games, it never got that much needed TLC the other games got, and now its bugs are more glaring than ever, and more issues have been slapped on top of it. A lot of people have made videos on this version of the game and how buggy it can be. However, there is a little bit of light at the end of this dark tunnel. A mod called Half-Life Source Fixed exists, and while it doesn't fix absolutely everything wrong with all the updates and lack thereof Valve gave this version, it does clean up a vast majority of them to the point where you could probably say this version of the game is playable and perhaps even enjoyable. So if you're going to play Half-Life Source, play it with the Fixed mod, please. Now, to an extent, something that came out of Half-Life Source and its minimalistic approach to porting the game came the full-on Black Mesa remake, developed partially due to this version of the game being a letdown compared to the glub Counter-Strike Source got. People all have their opinions on Black Mesa. The general consensus is that it's a good remake, but of course I'd recommend running through the original first either way, whether it be through the Steam release, the Source version with the Fixed mod, or perhaps even the restored or MMod versions. However, there is another way. XashRT, specifically nowadays the XashRT FWGS engine, is currently the closest thing to a fully functioning fan-made source port for Half-Life. There are quite a lot of forks to it as well, such as PrimeXT to name at least one. In addition to raising limits and opening up the potential gold source beyond the Steam release, it also has more support for cross-platform play. It particularly has some popularity in being played via forks specifically built for Android phones. There is an issue with this port and its forks and spin-offs. It does not have Valve support. Quite the opposite, actually. The reason for this is that it has a history of using a base of code from the leaked 2003 Half-Life 2 beta, rewritten and adapted to be gold source compatible. This might not be the case for new versions nowadays. Don't quote me on that. But even if it is, the history behind it still picks at that mental scar Valve got around 20 years ago from that leak. In the meantime though, if you're okay with this, you can reap the benefits of this engine. It supports higher texture resolutions, the potential for better sound quality, even though I still prefer MetaAudio, and lots of other things that people still are messing around with. Heck, it's why that whole ray trace version of Half-Life exists. By the way, the guy that made that got a job at Nvidia, can you believe that? It's still a solid way to play the game on its own, and also a solid way to play most mods due to its flexible support of most of them. On top of this, it also brings back that classic retail CD release menu. Very nice. There's also another port in progress using FTEQW as a base that intends to be a more clean room implementation of Half-Life into something open source that could potentially avoid the legal limbo XashRT's forks are in. FreeHL has been in development for a few years, and if finished, or at least put into a fully playable state, can potentially circumvent some issues the previous port has. The only problem is there's probably going to be a lot of work ahead for the implementation of the base game, and let's not even think about implementing mods for it right now. So for now, those are the options we have to work with, at least the options most people will have access to. While the present doesn't give us much options, who could say for tomorrow? Perhaps Valve might decide one day to legitimately open source gold source, perhaps they'll give the XashRT forks their blessing, but I would not count on either of these happening. There's always a non-0% possibility of this though. I mean, we finally got a new Half-Life game after 13 years of thinking it was going to happen, right? But I don't want to get your hopes up too much, just enjoy the game for what it is. Pick your port of choice, give it a whirl, and although I will admit that the possibility of an open source scenario is extremely unlikely.
Viewers don't need to hear all this, they're highly trained professionals. We've assured the audience that none of their choices are wrong.
Yes, you're right. Viewers, I have complete confidence in you.
Well, go ahead. Let's end the video now.
With a special thank you to the supporters, included but not limited to Griffin, Beaks Make Me Coom, Sean Grant, and Karma. Your support is appreciated. Thank you as well for watching, and until next time, I'll see ya when I see ya. So, see ya.